What are the 12 main causes of hair loss in women? What about the less common ones that are easily overlooked? Well, in this video, I will explain you why hair loss happens and why hair falls out in women of all ages. Also, I'm going to share my personal experience with some of these causes at the end of this video, so stay with me until then. Hello everyone and welcome back to Supplement Talks, where we do supplement reviews and health tutorials. So if you find this video helpful, please like it and subscribe to support these free and I hope helpful tips that I'm sharing here. And also don't forget to follow us on our other social media channels. Now, by far the most important and most common cause of hair loss in women is iron deficiency or low ferritin. I know you heard this everywhere and that I'm not giving you anything new, but unfortunately, iron deficiency triggers almost 50% of cases of female hair loss all over the world. The reason is pretty obvious. Women lose blood monthly, and blood contains a high amount of iron. So we are a lot more inclined to iron deficiency than men or even than postmenopausal women. Now, our follicles store a high quantity of iron, which is essential for hair growth and development. So when your body lacks iron, it starts taking it from your hair follicles, and as a consequence, your hair starts to fall out. When hair loss is caused by a lack of iron, your hair tends to get very brittle and very dry no matter how you hydrate it or how you try to moisturize it. It also tends to fall out severely all over your scalp, especially if you pull it slightly. You can also start losing hair from your eyebrows, but this doesn't always happen. But basically, dry and brittle hair that falls out severely is a specific sign of iron deficiency and hair loss. Now, the best way to see if you're deficient in iron is by checking your ferritin levels and not your serum iron levels, because it's not that specific. I have a more detailed video about the things you need to test out for your hair loss, so in case you want to find out more, I will link it below. But basically, a value of ferritin under 30 is a clear sign of deficiency. So if your value is under 30, this is definitely what is making your hair fall out. If your value is between 30 and 50, well, it's a decent one and it may or may not be involved in your shedding, so you can't really tell for sure. But ideally, you want it to be over 70 or even above, the more the better, because this is the best value for a healthy hair growth. So if you're anything under 50, I do advise you to try to increase your ferritin level so that the next time you have your ferritin tested, it gets closer to 70. Probably the most overlooked trigger of hair loss in women is DHT or dihydrotestosterone, which is a hormone made from testosterone, but it's a lot more powerful than testosterone itself. DHT is present in higher amounts in men, as it's normal, but it also exists in women. And in a lot of cases, it exists in an excessive amount that causes symptoms like body hair, acne, or hair loss. That's because DHT shrinks hair follicles, so your hair starts thinning very badly at the roots. Now, DHT-caused hair loss in women is called androgenic alopecia, and it comes with some very specific signs. First of all, it's rather chronic, which means that your hair doesn't fall out very severely, as it happens in iron deficiency, for example. However, your hair falls out in smaller rates for years, no matter what product you try to use or whatever you try to do. Besides, your hair ends look normal, but your roots become thinner, and this part in the middle, the ones that everyone has, well, it starts widening every single year. You may also be dealing with oily hair, and in a lot of cases, you also suffer from acne, body hair, and irregular periods, which are some of the symptoms that I mentioned before. Now, I have a more detailed video on androgenic alopecia, or hair loss caused by DHT excess in women, so feel free to check that out as well. But shortly, the solution is to check your DHT levels and see where you stand. And this takes us to the third major trigger of hair loss in women, which are hormonal imbalances, but not necessarily DHT excess, because there can be several others. Basically, a hair loss caused by a hormonal imbalance can appear in several ways. It can be caused by testosterone or DHT excess, as we already talked before. It can be due to a high prolactin. It's also possible that hair breaks off easily if there's a lack of estrogen. Basically, the signs are pretty different depending on the exact hormone that disrupts your hair cycle. But the best way to see if there is anything wrong is by having a full hormonal test, which should include your LH, FSH, progesterone, estrogen, prolactin, and testosterone, free testosterone, androstenedione, DHAI, and DHT. Now, some of these blood tests can be done at any time, while others have some specific values depending on the day of your cycle, so you should do them in a certain day. The next trigger of hair loss is somehow related to hormonal imbalances, but not completely. I'm talking about either pregnancy, which causes hair loss in a lot of women, or about birth control, which is again responsible for a lot of cases of shedding. Now, regarding pregnancy, hair loss appears because your body is dealing with a change in hormones, and in most situations, this is totally reversible and it usually goes away on its own. However, if it is not, there might be something else involved. As for birth control, well, hair loss usually appears either after you began taking it or a few weeks or months after you quit it. And just like in pregnancy, it's also caused by the change or disruptions in your hormones that your body is dealing with. Again, it's completely reversible and it usually goes away on its own, but you may want to speed up this process and have a hormonal panel test where you can spot any imbalances and you can treat them together with your OB. In both cases of hair loss, the shedding is pretty general, so your hair falls out all over your scalp constantly and sometimes even pretty badly. Menopause is the next really common cause of hair loss, and I would also link it to hormonal issues, even though it's not an imbalance because it's completely normal. However, what happens in menopause is that the female hormones, which are estrogen and progesterone, well, they drop dramatically. In fact, some studies show that a woman past menopause has a lower amount of estrogen and progesterone in her blood than a man at the same age. Now, out of these two hormones, estrogen is involved in growing healthy hair. It has a protection effect, and it gives that glow that is so specific to female hair. Obviously, once its level drops, your hair will start to lose its shine, thin out, and it can also begin to fall out quite massively. And it's all because of this lack of estrogen. The hair loss is very similar to that caused by DHT excess in terms of signs, meaning that your hair will get thinner and it will fall out in a chronic manner rather than in a severe one. Another really common cause of hair loss that has nothing to do with hormones is the lack of zinc, or shortly, Zinc Deficiency. This mineral is involved in the hair growth process, but it's also part of the hair strand structure. So you can guess that a deficiency will weaken your hairs, which will then start to break off and fall out. Like in the case of iron deficiency, hair that lacks zinc is brittle, it's very dry no matter how you try to hydrate it, and it also breaks off really easily. The next trigger of hair loss in women are thyroid issues, particularly hypothyroidism, which means an underactive thyroid. Hyperthyroidism, or an overactive thyroid, can also cause hair loss, but it's a lot more rare than hypothyroidism, which is actually quite common, especially milder forms. Now, you should know that thyroid imbalances don't affect your hair follicles directly, like iron deficiency does or DHT excess. If your hair loss is caused by a thyroid problem, it will not be extremely severe, but rather chronic, which means that your hair will get again very dry, very brittle, and it would start to break off very easily. The pattern is pretty similar to that caused by DHT excess, except that thyroid imbalances will not necessarily widen your parts, so your roots can actually stay normal just like before, but your hair starts to thin out really badly in general, all over the scalp, both at the roots and at the ends. Another cause of hair loss that is often missed are autoimmune conditions, and more specifically alopecia areata. The good news about it is that it's pretty rare, and the bad news, well, it doesn't really have a treatment that would work in all cases. Basically, this condition appears when your immune system mistakenly attacks a part of your hair because it starts to see it as a foreign part of your body. The results are bald patches in different parts of your scalp, which is a very specific sign of this condition, and it can't really be confused with anything else. The problem about alopecia areata is that it's an autoimmune condition, and its treatment is pretty much the same as that of any autoimmune condition, and that is lowering your immune system so that it doesn't attack your hair anymore. This surely works, but it also puts you at risk for a lot of infections, so you're basically risking your own health just to save your hair, which is honestly not really worth it. If you think you're dealing with alopecia areata, seeing a dermatologist is a must, because a specialist is the only person that can actually diagnose this problem and prescribe you the right treatment for this condition, because this is what it actually is. It's a condition. Up next, there is another cause of hair loss I would mention, but I will not insist too much on it because it's not that common and it rarely causes any severe cases. I'm talking about fungal infections that can affect your scalp, and they typically make your hair fall out in patches in certain areas. So the hair loss is rarely general and all over the scalp. But the affected areas are usually more inflamed, they have a different color, and they somehow look different than the healthy parts of your scalp. Whereas in alopecia areata, they tend to look normal. It's only that they have no hair on them. So that's pretty much the difference between these two conditions' symptoms. However, if you suspect that you have a fungal infection, you absolutely have to see a dermatologist in order to have it treated. The following cause of hair loss is something you will hardly believe, but a lot of people have actually experienced hair loss after following a vegetarian diet for several months or several years. And that's usually because of a vitamin B12 or B9 deficiency, because they are both found in foods like meat or dairy. So if you follow a very restrictive diet for a longer time, you may end up dealing with a deficiency in these vitamins. We also have a deficiency that you surely heard about, and that is the lack of vitamin D. Unfortunately, a lot of people are deficient in this vitamin simply because they spend a lot of time indoors, either working or doing anything else. But having a very severe hair loss caused exclusively by a deficiency in this vitamin is extremely rare. It can happen if your levels are below 10. But most people with a deficiency can lead very normal lives with very normal hair. So I would say the link between vitamin D and hair loss is kind of overestimated. And last but not least, I have to mention a group of affections that a lot of people talk about, and they consider them responsible for their hair loss, which I don't really agree with. I'm talking about dermatitis, which is definitely not a trigger of hair loss itself, as some people say, but it can worsen an existing hair loss. Now, dermatitis is a condition that I have been personally fighting for over 10 years, since my teenage years, and I did not manage to find a treatment that always works. But anyways, what I have learned all this time is that dermatitis does not make your hair fall out or anything. You can grow your hair perfectly normal even if you have dermatitis. But obviously, if you can get rid of it, or at least keep it under control, it's best to do it simply because a healthy scalp is so much better than an inflamed one. But please keep in mind that just because you have dermatitis doesn't mean that you have to be dealing with hair loss. If it happens, it's usually because there is another trigger and dermatitis is only making it worse. So to recap, the most common causes of hair loss in women are iron deficiency, DHT excess, hormonal imbalances, thyroid problems, or nutritional deficiencies. On the other hand, local infections and triggers are a lot more rare. For any questions that you have, I'm here for you. I would gladly help you understand the results of your tests if this is the case, so let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching and talk to you soon.